My name is Deepa. I am SAP Technical Architect. I have close to 9 years of experience in SAP. I have worked in many implementation projects on WebDynpro ABAP, SAP ABAP, and SAP Enterprise Portal, and I am SAP Certified Portal Consultant. SAP WebDynpro ABAP is SAP's standard user interface technology for developing screens and applications for user interaction. So this session would give you a hands-on training on SAP WebDynpro ABAP, which will enable you to work on SAP WDA, that is WebDynpro ABAP projects and WDA applications. We will also guide you and prepare you on interview questions for SAP WebDynpro ABAP. So the course content would include an introduction on SAP WebDynpro ABAP. We will first give you an overview of SAP MVC architecture, which is Model View Controller architecture. This is the architecture based on which SAP WebDynpro ABAP architecture is designed. So you would understand what is SAP Model View Controller architecture, what are its benefits, and how it translates into SAP WebDynpro ABAP architecture. And what is WebDynpro ABAP, and how do we choose between SAP WebDynpro ABAP or SAP WebDynpro Java. WebDynpro ABAP and Java are two technologies provided by SAP. So we would give you pointers on where do you choose WebDynpro ABAP or Java for developing your application. Then we will go over the SAP WebDynpro architecture in detail. What is component, what are views and windows, what is meant by context, the data binding and data mapping features of WebDynpro ABAP. We will go in detail over all of these. Also, what is a controller, what is a model, and what is an application in WebDynpro perspective. So we would understand these terms, make ourselves familiar with these terms, because these are the basics of WebDynpro ABAP, and we would be using them in all further sessions, in all further topics. We would see what are the prerequisites for WebDynpro ABAP. If you have to start your first application, what are the prerequisites that your system should have, and what is it that you have to configure so that you can develop your WebDynpro ABAP application. And we would develop a simple WebDynpro application, a simple WebDynpro ABAP application, a simple hello world kind of application in our first lesson. Then lesson 2 will give us details on eventing. User interaction is mainly event-driven application. So when a user triggers an event, how do you handle that event in WebDynpro ABAP? So we will understand that. How do we navigate between different screens in an application? What are the ways that you can navigate, and how do you configure something called as plugs, inbound and outbound plugs? That is a WebDynpro specific concept. We will understand that. We would also learn about interfaces in WebDynpro ABAP. Interface is something which is used to communicate between two different components. So we would understand how one component communicates with another component using interfaces. We would understand what are the different UI elements. We would be using many of these UI elements in the hands-on exercises that we do. If you see in most of our lessons, we have hands-on exercises on each of the topic that we learn in that lesson. So along with theory, you would also be using that theory in a practical application, so you understand that better and you experience it. We would understand what is data binding and data mapping concepts, what is the difference between them, and how do you use data binding and how do you use data mapping. In lesson 3, we would understand on component usage. How do you use one component inside another component? Component is basically a reusable entity in WebDynpro ABAP. For example, you can have a component on, say, purchase order create. That is a component. It's a business requirement. You want to develop an application which creates a purchase order. So you can develop one component for purchase order create. Or you can develop one component on purchase order and have different applications inside it, like purchase order create, purchase order change, purchase order display. So we would see how do you decide what should be a component and till what granular level you should go to develop a component, and how you can reuse one component within another. We would also do a session here and also a hands-on exercise on integrating list viewer with WebDynpro ABAP. Now, if you come from an SAP ABAP background, so you would know that list viewer is used extensively in ABAP reporting. So how do we use list viewer in WebDynpro ABAP? That is what we would understand here. Similarly, how do you use select options and object value selector? These are the ways of and means for displaying F4 help or search help on a particular field on the screen. We would understand what is assistance class, what are its benefits, and how do we use assistance class. Then we would also understand the concept of translation in WebDynpro ABAP, which is nothing but how do you make an application which can be used in multiple languages. So you can use online text repository and how you can display messages. So we will understand that in this particular lesson. Then lesson 4 will take us to dynamic programming. Dynamic programming is nothing but where you program at runtime based on certain user input or based on certain conditions. You display a UI element or a user interface element like a button or a screen field, or you hide a screen field. So how do you do dynamic programming in WebDynpro ABAP? We would also understand how do you integrate WebDynpro ABAP application with SAP NetWeaver portal. Now we would also, as part of this training, we would give you a brief introduction and overview of SAP portal, people who have not come from that background, so you would understand what SAP NetWeaver portal is, what it does, how do you integrate WebDynpro ABAP with SAP NetWeaver portal. We would understand how to personalize your WebDynpro ABAP application. There are two ways of personalizing it. Either you can use personalization, which would be common for all users or a certain set of users, or you can use component or application configuration. Now, in which cases you use personalization, in which cases you use component or application configuration, we would understand that, and what are the differences, how do you personalize your application. For example, say you want to hide certain field for a certain set of users, or you want to default certain field for a set of users. So those kind of requirements. Then lesson 5 will introduce us to certain advanced concepts in WebDynpro ABAP, like integration with Adobe Forms. Adobe Forms are nothing but interactive or non-interactive forms for say displaying a purchase order or displaying an invoice form. So how do you integrate those with WebDynpro ABAP? We would learn about Floor Plan Manager for WebDynpro ABAP. Floor Plan Manager is nothing but a framework of creating WebDynpro ABAP applications into using floor plans or building blocks. This is the standard UI technology used by SAP for all business suite developments. So if you see all the business packages which SAP provides, like say for example ESS, MSS, employee self-service or manager self-service, or any other business packages, so SAP always uses, it's the go-to technology for business suite development for SAP. So we would understand what is Floor Plan Manager. We would also understand how do you enhance a WebDynpro ABAP application. I mean, how do you enhance a standard WebDynpro ABAP application? If it's SAP provided standard application and you want to enhance it, just like people who come from ABAP background would understand this as, say, creating a customer enhancement or creating a screen enhancement on just as we do in enhancement framework in ABAP. So what is the enhancement framework for WebDynpro ABAP? You would understand here. Then in this session, in this lesson, we would also know about SAP's strategy and roadmap for user interface technologies, what SAP has planned for UI technologies, which technologies are the new ones which would not be supported here on. So we would understand a little bit more about those. Then lesson 6 and lesson 7 would give us some pointers and tips on how do you create a high-performing WebDynpro application. What are the important conditions that you should take care when you create a WebDynpro application, WebDynpro ABAP application? How do you monitor the performance of a WDA application, and what are the administration aspects? What are the best practices? And then we would also give you some useful tips on interview questions. So this is the agenda of this session. As you can see, in almost all the sessions we have hands-on exercises on all the topics that we are learning in that session. So this will give you a good hands-on on WebDynpro ABAP. The intent of this training is for you to be able to develop applications as soon as you complete the training. Now, to start with Model View Controller Architecture Overview. So Model View Controller is nothing but a development pattern which separates the user interface layer and the business interaction layer. So you have a separate view, you have a model, and you have a controller. So view is nothing but which manages the display of the information. So how the information is displayed to the user. So you handle that in view. And model is something which basically Model is something which manages the behavior and data of application domain, and it responds to requests from the user and from the controller. So for example, a model can be a ABAP call in ABAP terms. So something which will fetch your data, something which will, based on the user request, it will generate the application data for the application. And controller is something which binds the user and business interaction layers together. So all the processing that has to be done on the data which is fetched by model is done in controller, and then that data is passed on to the view for displaying it to the user. So the biggest advantage of MVC architecture is that the business logic and the display logic are clearly separated from each other. This separation allows for reusability. So since model is completely separated from your view and controller, so you can reuse the same model in different applications. For example, say you're fetching a sales order data and from certain different tables, combining different tables and fetching the data in certain format. And you can reuse that particular model in different applications. So where, say, in one application you want to display the sales order data in a list format, and in some other application you want to do some more processing on that data and then display it in the form of an Adobe form or something, some other layout. So your model is basically something which you can reuse in multiple views. This also supports for scalability, where you can build bigger applications. So you can reuse small applications into different application, and then build bigger applications. It allows for ease of modification and maintenance because of the clear separation of tasks. So you can maintain the application better. So WebDynpro ABAP design is based on MVC architecture. So in a WebDynpro ABAP, there's a very clear distinction between view, model, and controller. So a good design in WebDynpro ABAP will differentiate between the user interaction layer, and will differentiate between the controller, and will differentiate between the model which fetches the data for you. Now WebDynpro ABAP is SAP standard UI technology, that is user interface technology for developing web applications in the ABAP environment. Now a similar technology is WebDynpro for Java, which provides you more or less similar functions in the Java environment. Now we'll see what are the differences between WebDynpro ABAP and Java in this course lesson, and how do you decide between the two, and what is SAP's roadmap for WebDynpro ABAP and WebDynpro Java going forward. WebDynpro ABAP consists of a runtime environment and a graphical development environment with special WebDynpro tools that are integrated in ABAP Workbench SAT transaction. So people who come from SAP background, SAP ABAP background would know about this transaction SAT. So this is a transaction that we use to build WebDynpro ABAP applications. And WebDynpro ABAP is released starting from NetWeaver 2004S. Moving on, some of the advantages for application developers. So WebDynpro ABAP is mostly a graphical development tool. So where you maximize your design and you minimize your coding effort. So graphical view layout design and declarative UI development significantly reduces the implementation effort. So as you would see, as you would develop your first application, you would understand that the amount of time and effort that is required for developing a WebDynpro ABAP application is significantly less for less than say developing similar application in module pool or in BSP or other web technologies, because there's a lot of code or a lot of program which is auto-generated in the background, especially for designing the view. You have to drag and drop the UI elements to where you want to place them, and all the code for it is generated automatically in the background. You use ABAP editor for it. All the ABAP dictionary data types are directly available since it is completely integrated with ABAP Workbench. So you don't have to declare data types again. All the data types are directly available. You can use ABAP debugging for debugging this WebDynpro ABAP application. Now, people who have come from WebDynpro Java application, they would understand that debugging in WebDynpro Java is a little different than how we debug in ABAP environment. So we would see debugging in WebDynpro ABAP. It is same as normal ABAP debugging. All the functionality and services of ABAP environment are directly usable in WebDynpro ABAP. Although there are certain statements, ABAP statements, which cannot be used in WebDynpro ABAP, we would understand what are those statements and why they cannot be used as we go on and develop our first application. Then moving on to ABAP lifecycle management, the transport of applications, translation, enhancements, these are something which since WebDynpro ABAP is completely integrated with Workbench, this is something which is automatically available in WebDynpro ABAP. So the transport of applications from one environment to another is done using the normal transport management of SAP ABAP. The translation where we want to create a WebDynpro application for different languages is can be handled through online text repository and text elements, the way we use in SAP ABAP. Plus the enhancement framework, as I was telling earlier, is very similar to ABAP enhancement framework. We would see how we can enhance standard WebDynpro ABAP applications. WebDynpro supports a structured design process, which is in model view controller structure, so indicating a clear distinction between views and between business logic. It allows for reuse and better maintainability by use of components. So we would see how components can be reused within each other and how does it benefit overall for the application developer. The layout and navigation is easily changed using WebDynpro tools. So it's a pretty much drag and drop layout which can be easily changed without having to do a lot of changes in the program or in the code. Stateful applications are supported. So this means that if a page is changed, the data would remain intact for the duration of the session. So for example, say you have 3 or 4 screens in your application, and user enters some data on the first screen, moves on to second, comes back to first, does some changes. So his data and his activities would remain intact for this duration of the session. So those are the stateful applications. WebDynpro ABAP supports stateful applications. Automatic data transport using data binding. Now this is something which is very specific to WebDynpro concept, where you don't have to specifically pass on the data from your view to your controller and from your controller to your model. So there is an automatic data transport. We would see how do we do data transport. That is the concept of data binding and data mapping. So we would understand those concepts as we go on in the sessions. Automatic input check, when you use an ABAP data type, it builds in the automatic input check. For example, if you use a data type and you key in an incorrect date on the screen, then the automatic check would kick in and it will give you the error message. So you don't have to program for that particular functionality. It is built in. User interface accessibility supported. This is for visually challenged users if you want to create an application. So WebDynpro ABAP supports that. Concept of WebDynpro ABAP is identical with WebDynpro Java and offers more or less the same functions. Now moving on to the detailed architecture for WebDynpro ABAP. Now this particular diagram compares WebDynpro Java and WebDynpro ABAP side by side, the architecture of WebDynpro Java and WebDynpro ABAP. So as you see, the front end for both is SAP Enterprise Portal. Now since these are web applications, you can display them using SAP Enterprise Portal or using a web browser. There is also a way of displaying WebDynpro ABAP applications as SAP GUI transactions. So we would also see how you can display the ABAP applications using SAP GUI transactions. Now on SAP Enterprise Portal, there's something called the WebDynpro iView, which is nothing but a placeholder for displaying WebDynpro application. So that iView would basically point to the WebDynpro Java or WebDynpro ABAP application. Now SAP NetWeaver Developer Studio. This is something which is used as an editor for WebDynpro Java applications. Similarly, ABAP Workbench, that is SCAT transaction, is used for developing WebDynpro ABAP applications. SAP NetWeaver Developer Studio is an Eclipse-based editor which allows you to create and edit WebDynpro Java applications. So as you see, WebDynpro ABAP application for fetching the data from your business server, it would use models like business API, which is BAPI, or web services. It would use these function modules or classes or BAPIs as data fetching mechanism. Similarly, WebDynpro Java would use an RFC call or a web service call to the ABAP server to develop to fetch the data from the backend, to fetch the business data. Now, in WebDynpro Java, the model is you have Enterprise Java Beans or EJBs as model. Similar concept in WebDynpro ABAP is business APIs or web services to fetch your data. Now moving on to detail architecture level of SAP WebDynpro ABAP component. The previous slide gave you an overview of how WebDynpro ABAP and how and Java interact with business data and how do they fetch the data. Now we will go at detail level in SAP WebDynpro ABAP architecture. So the fundamental unit of WebDynpro ABAP application is a component. A component is nothing but it's a reusable entity. It's a business process. So say if you have to display or if you have to create a WebDynpro application for say displaying the article, displaying the material or say product or articles. So you create a WebDynpro component for that. Each component would have a controller, component controller. Controller is nothing but where you define your data, where you create your methods for processing the data, and where you also create your event handlers. So controller is something where basically in layman terms where you write your code or your logic. So every component will have a component controller. You can also create a custom controller in that component, but there has to be one. There would be at least one controller, which is the component controller. A component can contain any number of views and windows, and then each view and each window will have their own controllers. A component can also be without any views. So in that case, that component is only used as a reusable component in some other component. So view is basically something which will be displayed to the user. So if the controller component doesn't have a view, so there will be nothing that is displayed to the view to the user. So that component can only be used within another component, which will have its own views. So we would see all those scenarios later. Now a component controller contains something called as context. Context is nothing but where you define your data. So if I have to use an ABAP analogy, it would be the data declaration, where you use your statement data big enough, so and so, and big enough internal table, then field 1, field 2, and then end of internal table. So you define an internal table structure and you define the fields within it. So that similar activity is performed in context within a component controller. So this is component controller context would be the global data. It would be visible to all views and all windows within that component. So once we go on in the training session, we would understand and we would see how a component looks like, how do you create context, how do you create global context, and how do you map it to your views and to your windows to create local context. Component would also have provision for you to create methods and create event handlers. There are certain standard methods available for each component. What do these methods do, and what are their parameters, input parameters, what values those parameters hold, and uh, at what point of time these particular methods are called. We would understand all of those in detail as we go on. So this will be the component controller for the component. Now a component would have multiple views and multiple windows in it, and each view would have a view controller, each window would have a window controller. So view controller also would have a context. Now this would be a local context. Say if you want to display certain data which is local to that particular screen or view, then you would create a local context. But if you want to display data which is also displayed in some other views in some other form, then you would create it in the component controller level as a global context, so that it is visible to all the views and all the windows within that component. View controller also has its own standard methods. You can create your own methods, you can create your own event handlers. And view controller has something called as actions, which is nothing but action is a user action. Say a click of a button is an action, or a double click on a particular say a list entry is a action. Or if it's a hyperlink, you've provided a hyperlink on the on your view. So when user clicks on that hyperlink, that's an action. How do you handle those actions? So we would see all of those. So that is view controller. And view also has a layout designer where you design your layout, where basically you drag and drop all the UI elements that you want to display. You bind them to the data. So say for example, if it's an input field, so you bind it to a data so that when user enters a value, that value is stored in that context data. So we would see all of that in detail once we go towards the hands-on session. And then component also contains windows. Now window is nothing but something which defines the view hierarchy. So it can have more than one views within a window, and you can define the navigation between the windows, say between the views. Say for example, a window can have 3 views, view 1, view 2 and view 3. So window would have the information that on certain conditions from view 1, view 2 is called, and then based on certain conditions on view 2, view 3 is called, and from view 3 you again call view 1. So that navigation information is stored at the window level. We would see that detail also. I mean, what is the architecture details of windows and views. Then the last portion that a component contains is interface controller. Now, as I mentioned earlier, interface is nothing but a component's entry to the outside world. So if you want to connect that component to any other component, it is done through interface controller. So we would see that in detail as we go on, how interface controllers are used to connect two components. Embedded components is nothing but using one component inside another component. So the communication between takes place through component interface. That is this interface controller. So we would do a hands-on on this to see how one component is used inside another. So moving on, this slide gives you a brief overview of views and windows. Now view, as I mentioned earlier, is nothing but which defines the layout and behavior of user interface. So each WebDynpro application has at least one view. Now if a WebDynpro application is for displaying data to the user, it would at least have one view. View also contains plugs, inbound and outbound plugs for navigation with different views. So how do we define that navigation is in Windows. So we would see how one inbound plug is connected to another outbound plug, and how it is triggered, how from one view we trigger or we call another view. Window combines several views using navigation links. You also have window plugs, so you can also call one window from another window. So a component can have, say, multiple windows, and you can call one window from another window, and within that window you have multiple views. So we will see all those complex scenarios. Unique window is a unique interface view for each window. Links window with WebDynpro ABAP application, enables window to be reused by multiple components. Now, application is nothing but when you create a component and views and windows inside it, to access that component using a web browser or using a URL, you have to create a WebDynpro application. WebDynpro application basically links that component through its window. Once we see the typical structure of a WebDynpro application, I will show you the typical structure of a WebDynpro application or a WebDynpro component. So when you create a component, what all objects are created inside it, and how each object interacts with another object. So we would understand more on that during that session. So for now, we just have to understand that an application connects to the component through its window. To give a little bit more detail on the view is a typical WebDynpro ABAP view would look like this, which will have certain areas for certain areas while developing the view, like UI categories, where you select which kind of user interface you want, whether you want a table or a button or an input field or a tree. So you can select the UI element. Then you have the view designer, where you drag and drop your UI elements and change their positions, change their length. So you can do all those activities in the view designer. You have the UI element. This is the this area is the UI element tree, which gives you the hierarchy of the UI elements. So if, say for example, you create a group, and within that group you create multiple UI elements, so it will show you the hierarchy. Then you have the properties of selected UI elements. So this section would give you the common properties for each UI element. What is its, whether it's visible or whether it's hidden or whether it's read only, or what is the text of that. Say for example, if you create a label, and you can define the text here in the properties. So this is the view designer in WebDynpro ABAP. We will certainly be using that once we start developing the applications. These are some of the categories of UI element. So you have text, you have action, selection. So under text you can have caption, label, text view, text edit, so different categories. Then some action UI elements like button. Action is which requires an action from the user. You have link to URL, you have link to action. So these are different UI elements. Then similarly you have selection, radio button, checkboxes. So we would certainly be using a lot of these UI element categories in our applications. Now moving on to give you a little bit of introduction to what is SAP's UI technology roadmap, what kind of UIs SAP would be using going forward. Now SAP UI5 is nothing but SAP UI Development Toolkit for HTML5. Now this is a client-side HTML5 and JavaScript programming model. It provides availability on any device or any platform, say any mobile device or using any platform, non-SAP platform. So this is the technology which is used to develop applications which are to be used on, say, mobile devices. It provides for stateless applications. So for now, I mean, as of now, it only supports stateless applications. But moving forward, SAP is going to enhance this to also support stateful applications. Stateful applications are the ones in which the user data or activity is maintained throughout the session. So even if user leaves that particular screen and goes on to another screen, his data and his activities would be maintained into the application. Now SAP App Designer is the tool used to develop the SAP UI5 applications. And SAP NetWeaver Gateway is the platform, is a development framework which enables connectivity to various devices, environments, and platforms to SAP software applications. So say for example, it will generate proxy classes or starter apps for iOS, Android, PHP, or Java platforms. So this SAP NetWeaver Gateway would be used as a development framework. Now for all business suite applications, SAP uses WebDynpro ABAP and Floor Plan Manager. Now Floor Plan Manager is nothing but applications based on WebDynpro ABAP, but they have a different structure. So we would see what are Floor Plan Manager applications going forward. But for all business suite applications, SAP would be using WebDynpro ABAP and Floor Plan Manager applications. So all the business packages and all the SAP standard program or code which SAP would be delivering for all business suite applications, it would be in WDA and FPM. Now, SAP Screen Personas is nothing but personalization without programming. So this is a tool which SAP provides for personalizing the most common SAP GUI screens. For example, say based on business need, on your need, you need to personalize standard, say, sales order processing application. You need to personalize it. So SAP provides SAP Screen Personas technology to do that. It's a drag and drop approach to modify most common SAP GUI screens. Now the most common clients which SAP uses are SAP NetWeaver Portal, which is nothing but a central role-based access with integration to different applications, reports, dashboards, services. It can be SAP or non-SAP backend. So SAP NetWeaver Portal provides a central access to all applications. It also has other capabilities like document management or collaboration, which is nothing but like instant messaging or discussion forums or wikis. So SAP NetWeaver Portal is the common client which SAP uses to host any of its applications. Then the next is SAP NetWeaver Business Client, which is nothing but a successor to SAP GUI. So SAP Logon or SAP GUI standalone doesn't really support integration with web applications. So SAP NetWeaver Business Client is like a successor to SAP GUI standalone. It also provides role-based access. It integrates with UI technologies like WebDynpro, UI5. So these are some of the technologies, UI technologies and frameworks which SAP will be using. Similarly, this slide gives you, based on different business solutions, what are the UI technologies which SAP would be using. So you can see WebDynpro ABAP and Floor Plan Manager is the go-to technology of SAP for all SAP Business Suite applications. Also on business analytics, SAP uses Adobe Flash, which can be integrated very easily with WebDynpro ABAP. So Adobe Flash provides you a rich user interface with, say, flashy graphs or dashboards. So those kind of applications also can be developed in WebDynpro ABAP with integration with Adobe Flash. These are some of the next two slides are some of the sample WebDynpro ABAP screens to give you a feel of how a WDA screen looks like. Now this particular screen is hosted on a portal, so you can see the coloring and the theme which can be controlled very easily in SAP NetWeaver Portal. Now this kind of user interface takes very minimum implementation effort for the design of the layout. I mean, if you have to define the layout, similar layout in, say, module pool programming, in SAP ABAP module pool programming, it would take a lot more effort than what you would need in SAP WebDynpro ABAP. The next screen also gives some WebDynpro ABAP screens. The screen print on the top left-hand corner for flight booking, you can see that this particular screen displays the flight booking for different flights, and it has a graphic view where it also gives you, just like in all the flight booking portals you see, where it will give you which are the available seats in that particular flight. So this part is Adobe Flash Island object, which is integrated with WebDynpro ABAP. So the bottom layout is developed in Adobe Flash using Adobe Flash, and you integrate that with WebDynpro ABAP. The top part is the WebDynpro ABAP application. Similarly, this screen gives you a sales target simulation, which it gives you certain graphs and certain analytics for sales targets. So these are all developed in Adobe Flash, and they are integrated with WebDynpro ABAP. WebDynpro ABAP doesn't provide you the ability to develop the flashy user interface. But if you have that interface developed in Adobe Flash or Adobe Flex, you can integrate that very easily in WebDynpro ABAP. So these are some of the sample screens for you to have a look at. It'll give you a brief understanding of what all is possible in WebDynpro ABAP. Now, this was a demonstration session of WebDynpro ABAP. It basically was to introduce you to this particular session, to let you know what all will be covered in this session. We would go in detail for each of these areas. We would understand each of the components of WebDynpro ABAP development, and we would also do a lot of hands-on for each topic. So these all would be covered in the next sessions. This was all for this particular demonstration session. Thank you.